Dearest Jacqueline, so good to see you, and thank you for agreeing to speak with me about your own entrepreneurial approach to philanthropy, but also about the role that impact investing and social entrepreneurship can play in helping communities around the world to develop solutions to the acute and often stubborn problems that they face. I've always admired that you've managed to seamlessly combine both entrepreneurialism and altruism in the work that you do at Acumen, especially in the patient capital approach to investing that Acumen is so widely associated with. And that's one of the key things that I'd very much like to talk with you about today. Jacqueline Novogratz is a truly wonderful founder and CEO of Acumen, which turns philanthropic funds into investment capital and makes long-term investments in individuals and early state companies that are focused on addressing challenges associated with poverty through market-based solutions. Fundamental to the work of Acumen is, of course, the idea that simply giving money away isn't always the best way to make a difference. By investing capital in change makers and supporting them in other ways to scale up their operations, Acumen has created a business model that's laser focused on generating sustainable and measurable impact. And that's ultimately what strategic philanthropy is also about. Jacqueline founded Acumen in 2001, I believe, and since then it's invested over $130 million in more than 120 social enterprises in Africa, Latin America, South Asia, the United States, and today Acumen has investees and fellows in, I think, 18 countries around the world. Jacqueline's also written a number of books, including the bestseller, great book, The Blue Sweater, and more recently, her Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, which contains 12 leadership practices for building a better world. Dear Jacqueline, as I mentioned, your organization, Acumen, has a unique philosophy and a very sophisticated approach, I think, for evaluating social enterprises. I know that you've done this 1,000 times before, but for those who may not be familiar with it, perhaps you can begin by explaining how you go about assessing whether a particular social enterprise is the right fit for Acumen.
Thanks, Badr, and it's always so wonderful to see you, and your introduction was just extraordinary, so thank you. So yes, while we are an investment vehicle, first and foremost, when we're identifying a social enterprise, we go back to our basic principle, which is standing with the poor. And so our first screen, if you will, is whether this enterprise is one that will specifically impact the lives of low-income people. Second, we then look at the entrepreneur. Does she have the vision and, equally as important, the execution skills to scale up a company that can reach hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of low-income people, and long-term provide profitability and returns to the investors? We have come to realize that Thomas Edison's adage that vision without execution is hallucination holds very true. And then third and foremost, Badr, most importantly, we assess the character of the entrepreneur. Vision, self-awareness, a team, yes. Beyond that, if you are truly going to build a company where both markets and governments have failed low-income people, you need to have a new set of leadership skills, listening, what we would call the moral imagination, the humility to recognize the world that you are in while still holding to a vision that you will be building, the ability to partner across lines of difference, sometimes with entities you might consider your adversary. And probably most important, the grit and resilience to do this work, not for a few years, but for many years. You hit those three, standing with the poor, the right vision and execution, and the character of the entrepreneur. And of course, there's lots of due diligence that looks like any other private equity firm. And we make a decision to go with it.
Beautifully said. And in your experience at Acumen and elsewhere, how much variation is there in the ways in which individuals and organizations think about and practice philanthropy or social entrepreneurship in different parts of the world? Are there any ironclad principles for generating impact that you think or should be universal?
Well, sure. I mean, we could talk all day, and you are better at this than me, even in terms of the different technical differences that we see with philanthropy and approaches to philanthropy. Whether there's a religious impetus for giving, or there is more of a societal impetus. Culturally, we see different mechanisms, but at the heart is the same human yearning to actually do good, to recognize that to whom much is given, much is indeed expected. What excites me about this moment in history is that you're seeing two consistent trends across every culture in which we work. And that is that wealthy individuals are getting weary of traditional approaches, top-down approaches to charity that too often create dependency. And they're looking for opportunities to build dignity, allowing people not just choice and opportunity, but through mechanisms that are, in fact, financially sustainable. And that connects then to the second big trend, which you already mentioned, which is that of social entrepreneurship. And I see that in every culture on the planet in which Acumen works, using the tools of business to solve tough social problems, and then finding the right kinds of capital to animate those businesses or nonprofits in ways that actually succeed in solving problems.
And one of the projects that is being considered at the Center for Strategic Philanthropy is the creation of a philanthropy accelerator that could identify promising philanthropic initiatives in the emerging markets and help these organizations to scale impact. You obviously have a lot of experience in this area. So to what extent can you apply a traditional investment mindset to the evaluation of nonprofit or even charitable initiatives and organizations and the scaling up of their operations? What's transferable about that process and what's perhaps not?
I love that question because in many ways, Badr, it's why I started Acumen in the first place. A lot is transferable. And I also appreciate that you said for both nonprofit and for-profit entities, the more I do this work, the more ecumenical I feel about that the organizational structure isn't what is important. It is that it is the right organizational structure for the problem that you are trying to solve, and that it is done in ways that are sustainable. And so using an investment mindset is powerful. Number one, I've already said, most good investors know that the most important factor on which to bet is the person, the people. And so betting on character. Number two, to bring a long-term rigor and discipline to the work that's being done. In business, it's easy because you have profit as your metric. That's where it gets a little bit trickier in the social sector. And yet increasingly, we're seeing metrics that do allow us to measure what we value, not just what we can count. And Acumen's work on lean data has been a real bonus for that. Third, I would say there's an honesty in investment about failure and cutting losses, as well as about seeing opportunities for collaboration, consolidation, mergers. And we don't see that enough in the social sector. So those would be the three areas, Badr, that I see enormous transference from traditional investing into social enterprise and for-profit and nonprofits. Where I think we could do a better job is that too often philanthropists think that they're taking an investment approach. But in fact, when it comes to their philanthropy, they're short-term in their thinking. They think about programs. While they want to bet on the person, they also want to determine the programs in which they will invest rather than giving unrestricted capital to the entrepreneur so that she can actually build an organization that can deliver real results. And third, because of the power dynamics that often exist in philanthropy, it's hard for social entrepreneurs often to talk about failure. And you'll hear conversations saying, well, we're still doing a great job and we're learning from all of this, almost avoiding the word like the plague. And that actually reduces the real conversations. It reduces trust and reduces what's so critical, which is the kind of long-term relationship, so that the philanthropist can be like an investor and help accompany the enterprise, ultimately to use not just their financial resources, but their social capital, their access to other entities, to other philanthropists. And if we could shift in those directions, I think we'd have a much more productive sector.
Absolutely. So well put. And, I've been asked a number of times, why did it make sense to have the center itself based in the Judge Business School in the University of Cambridge? And quite simply, because I think both the for-profit and the non-profit world have so much more to learn from each other than perhaps has been harnessed in the past. And it really is a two-way learning curve, if you will, because just as businesses, or just as the non-profit world, I think, and the charitable world, if you will, the philanthropic space, let's say, has so much to learn from business for all the reasons that you've just mentioned. I think businesses also, though, as more businesses are more in tune with and aligned with their social purpose and their social output, there's so much that businesses can learn, of course, from the social investment space, if you will. So it can be a much more healthy, symbiotic relationship if we bring these worlds closer to each other. They don't need to merge, but I think that there's far more collaboration and strong collaboration that can be had by bringing them together.
Badr, I love that you said that, because in many ways, the world is very different today than when you and I were born. We truly are interdependent. And in this new chapter, we need to redefine our social contract. And both business and civil society are critical to that social contract, as is government. And so the brilliance of what you're doing by bringing them together and recognizing that the focus on equality, the focus on the poor, and building community is something the world critically needs right now. Business has too often overlooked the poor, overlooked our responsibilities to the environment, and there's a recognition of that. And so if we're truly going to reimagine not only capitalism, but reimagine what it means to live in society with each other, then the work that you are doing in the of the center is indeed to speak about the different roles and the ways that business and the charitable sector can do much more in concert than either sector can do on its own.
Absolutely. So I'd like to go back to something you mentioned, I think, in response to the first question around what makes a successful social enterprise, but more than the enterprise, the individual. And so that sort of goes to, I guess, skills. And for at least 2 decades, you've been involved in different ways in the training and mentoring of philanthropists, social entrepreneurs, and the next generation of social sector leaders. What do you think are the key skills that inspiring philanthropists or social entrepreneurs should seek to develop in order to give themselves the best chance of succeeding in their chosen field? And finally, what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about leaving their own job on Wall Street today, or the equivalent in their own country, in order to pursue a career in the philanthropic sector, as you did yourself many years ago?
So, as you said in your wonderful introduction, my book, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, actually has 12 practices and therefore 12 skills which we think are essential. And the reason I wrote it in the first place, Badr, was because when I think about those social entrepreneurs that succeed not only in building companies, but in changing overall systems, it does come back to this set of skills and attributes. And I'll only choose a couple of them or a few of them, so as not to talk too long. But I would say the most important is what I would call the moral imagination. This idea that you do have the humility to see that you're working in really tough markets, often markets that are corrupt, full of bureaucracy, complacency, and a status quo that you have to fight against. And yet, if you cannot hold on to the vision of what can be, it will be almost impossible to develop the kind of grit and resilience that's needed, and to get others to come on the journey with you to actually build the right kind of organization. Connected to moral imagination is listening, not just with your ears, but with all parts of yourself. We're seeing too little of it in the world. The best entrepreneurs, particularly those that serve low-income populations, start by understanding how people see themselves, what their needs are, what their hopes are, so that they can actually build products and services that meet those needs in ways that people can value and can afford. Third, I would say the ability to hold opposing values in tension. That is really hard right now because everywhere we look, people are standing on great certainty, whether it's business ideology versus government ideology, or if it's just more tribalism like the kind we're seeing in the United States and other countries around the world. Yet the social entrepreneurs who have the character to realize that there's often, if not always, some small truth, even on the opposing side, are the ones that are more able to build partnerships between the private sector and government, are the ones that are able to go into communities though they may not have anything to do with them, and they may even be mistrusted when they first approach them, and actually gain that trust. And so opposing values. At Acumen, for us to be successful, we have to hold accountability and generosity. It's sometimes an uncomfortable tension to hold. And then finally, I would say you have to learn to tell the stories that matter. Storytelling is fundamental to fundraising. It is fundamental to changing mindsets. It is fundamental to finding followers and keeping them. And we do too little skill building for entrepreneurs of all sorts, particularly social entrepreneurs, around telling stories that matter, that change narratives and build momentum. In terms of advice to a young social entrepreneur setting out, I would say number one, see the myriad problems around us as opportunities waiting for you to solve them. And then go toward the ones that meet your deeper yearning. The Jesuits say, go to where your deepest yearning meets the world's great needs. I would say, you see it, take a step forward toward it. Just start. Be curious and follow your thread of curiosity. And that gets you on the path. Once you have the courage to start and take a step on that path, the work will teach you the next place that you have to go. And then the path begins to unfold. In some ways, though, as you know, we're all about quantitative metrics and dollars and cents and building companies that serve millions. It's also the Sufi way. It is, it's daring to seek the unknown and having the courage to believe in yourself and believing in a deep sense of purpose and letting that purpose guide you.
Beautifully said, Jacqueline. As always, there's only one thing that I might add to that is, as you started out by saying, identifying problems, also really being disciplined about really understanding those problems and being rigorous about understanding not just the nature of the problem, but perhaps the different solutions that might exist or that might not exist to go about trying to address and tackle that problem.
I love it. I love that you said that, Badr. In a way, I was trying to go there by saying that the thread of your curiosity, because I think you're right.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's just that hallucination again. It's a recklessness that you see something and then you think you know the answer. That actually comes with arrogance rather than having the humility to immerse and understand a problem and move from there. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. If you have time for one further question, Jacqueline, and this is, as you know, the center is dedicated to the study of philanthropy within the emerging markets, which are the top 30 fastest growing economies in the world last year were all in emerging markets. And Acumen, of course, has a strong presence on the ground in many of these countries. So in the work that you're doing in these parts of the world, are you witnessing a rise in the amount of philanthropic activity in general? And how do you think the rapid rise of these economies are changing conditions on the ground for communities and social innovators in these markets?
I'm definitely seeing the rise both on the philanthropic side and in terms of social entrepreneurs. And I have always believed that the greatest innovation happens at the edges. And I've actually been giving speeches in the United States, Badr, where I've been talking about how we have to look to the emerging markets because it is here in areas that have traditionally been more resource scarce where we're seeing the greatest amount of innovation, and innovation to solve our biggest problems, like healthcare, like education, like access to electricity and improving agriculture. And I'm deeply heartened by that. We're not going fast enough, Badr. And because there is such a hunger about in the next generation to use the tools of business to solve these problems. And they need the right kind of capital to match it. And so something that I'm thinking about and would love to work with you on and the center is how do we build momentum because the opportunities are so great. And I do believe that these are the markets for all of us who care about innovation and change and the poor and the environment to follow. Because at the end of the day, what we're really talking about, your work and mine, is to shift our definition of success from money, fame, power to building systems that put our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth at the center. The next generation understands that this is where we have to go. And it's to our generation to accompany them, support them, and help them build this new world.
Jacqueline, you're awesome. And this brief chat's reminded me how much I cherish these conversations and I look forward to these conversations. And thank you so much for doing this. And I can't wait to repeat it in the hopefully not too distant future and in person. So thank you once again.
In person, Badr. Thank you for saying in person. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Really look forward to it. Thank you so much. Thank you.